This didn't happen to me personally, but I thought it was such a good story I should share it here. When this happened, my friend was dating a girl in the next town over. She was part of a group we hung out with over there. Our towns were separated by about 10 miles of woods and farmland. We spent a lot of time traveling back and forth on the major highway that connected them. We'd all been traveling on it since we were little and knew it well. To my knowledge, it had never had a bad reputation or was considered dangerous. I certainly had never met anyone else that had ever had a similar thing happen to them before or since. It was old and a little rough in places, but that is the status quo in small-town Texas. Most days, one or more of us would have been riding along with him, but for some reason, he was alone this day. He had just left his girlfriend's house and was about 5 minutes into his commute. A flashing light caught his attention in the rearview mirror. He looked up and saw an old Jeep Cherokee flashing its headlights at him. He was going about 75, and the Jeep was closing in fast. He assumed the driver had an emergency and was trying to clear the road ahead of him. He changed lanes to allow the Jeep to speed ahead. However, when he did this, the Jeep also changed lanes. He was puzzled. Maybe the guy just misread my intentions, he thought. He sped up a bit and moved back over to his original lane. Once again, the Jeep did the same. He was unsure of what to do, and while he considered his options, the Jeep accelerated and rammed the back of his car. He came very close to losing control but held firm. As you can imagine, he was freaking out. He did the only sensible thing he could think of and floored the gas pedal. The Honda Accord he was driving was well capable of outrunning the Jeep. Unfortunately, he moved just a tad too slow. The Jeep rammed him again. To his credit, I'm not sure I would have been capable of maintaining control, but he did. By now, he was beginning to pull away, and this is where he made a major mistake. To his right was an exit off the highway. He had to know it wouldn't lead anywhere but to more empty land and woods. Perhaps he thought he'd trick the Jeep's driver by making a quick exit. I could never get a clear answer for him. Either way, just before he was to pass the exit ramp, he made a quick cut across 2 lanes and left the highway. He thought he'd shaken his stalker, but the familiar shape of the Jeep was now hot on his tail. He was running out of options and he knew it. Now he was in an even worse situation. The access road was virtually invisible from the highway and it was getting dark. If no one saw what was happening before, he was really screwed now. At the bottom of the hill, he blew through the stop sign and sped up the next hill. There was an entrance ramp coming up soon and he planned to take it. The outskirts of town were close. There was no way the Jeep driver would continue the pursuit once they got into town. He was sure he'd be able to make some space if he could just get to the top. He did, but the Jeep proved a hair faster and rammed the back of the car one final time. This was the hardest hit so far and caused him to finally lose control. The force of the collision caused the car to leap forward to the right. The right side of this road made a dramatic drop about 35 feet down into a creek. I could be overestimating the drop a little, but it was definitely pretty high. He remembers the car rolling over once, but he lost consciousness right after. The picture I saw on the paper showed the roof of the car actually caved in and the rear end smashed. It was resting on a precipice just inches from falling another 10 feet into the creek bed. A passing motorist happened to catch sight of his lights from the highway and called for help. Once they arrived, he was rushed to the hospital and remained there for a few days. His most serious injuries were a punctured lung, along with a few other broken ribs, a broken collarbone, and a very bad concussion. The sprains and bruising weren't exactly minor themselves, but he did go on to make a full recovery. I'm sure most of you reading this right now are wondering one thing. Why would someone try to kill a complete stranger? And here's where we get into a hazy area. According to my friend, he did not do anything to cause such an extreme behavior, nor did he recognize the Jeep or its driver. Since I never heard of a person ever being accused, let alone charged for the crime, I have to use some deductive reasoning here. Is it possible a crazy man saw an opportunity to drive a complete stranger off the road? Yes, crazier stuff happens every day all around the world. I even know a pair of guys from the same town who often took advantage of weaker people when they saw a chance. Not only did one of them sucker punch a friend of mine, I actually had to run in with both young men. Fortunately, I got away unscathed. If it was one of those guys, I can assure you they messed with the wrong guy one night and got their just desserts. That said, I don't think it was that. I am of the belief that my friend did or said the wrong thing to someone and they went all Frank Castle on him, if you get my drift. I was in a car with a guy who flipped off another driver and very nearly ended up being shot. Like I said, there's a lot of crazy folks out there. Maybe my friend did something similar and was punished for it. He wasn't the kindest of guys and could be arrogant. We've been estranged for a long time, and for all I know, he could be dead now. A victim of his own cockiness, I suppose. Automobiles are very dangerous machines. They kill more people every year than really anything, and we just have to accept this because they're so important to our daily lives. Knowing that there are people out there willing to destroy their own property and possibly even harm themselves to get revenge, it truly does give me chills. It's been over 6 months since this happened, but I'm still having a hard time getting past it. I don't have the means to get counseling. I thought maybe posting an account here could help somehow. Maybe there's someone reading this that could push me in a helpful direction, or it could just make everything else worse. I'm willing to try anything at this point. I'm not sleeping well, and it's going to affect my life in other ways. So please listen to what I have to say, and feel free to comment with your thoughts, or even better, the low-cost way I can get the help I need from real professionals. I was on my way to the post office to ship a package when my car died. This wasn't a new thing. It is an older car. Its gauges began doing weird stuff just after the warranty expired. I'm a student living with my parents. Neither me nor them have the money to fix such a seemingly unimportant problem. As long as the speedometer keeps working, I'm happy. Unfortunately, the gas gauge is one of the problem sections. It seems to only work when it wants to. Under 1/4 of a tank, you can't trust it. And I found out this the hard way by running out of gas on a very busy part of the road. Ever since, I tried to keep the tank above 1/4, but I keep a small gas container in my trunk just in case. The day of my post office trip, my tank must have run empty. This time I was on a quiet part of a road. I checked my phone and found a gas station less than a mile away. It was a nice cool day and the wind was light. I figured I couldn't pick a better day to run out of gas, I suppose. I was a few minutes into my walk when I heard a car approaching me from behind. I moved over into the grass to make sure I wouldn't be hit. As the car passed, it began to slow down. I looked over and saw a young man leaning out of the passenger window. He was smiling and looked like a kind person. I wasn't sure what he wanted. I hadn't tried to hitchhike, and I did nothing that I would think gave him that impression. I nodded and said hello in a nice voice. I didn't know what else to do. I returned my gaze forward and continued my walk. I'd walk about 5 steps when the passenger called out to me. "Need a ride?" A chill ran down my back. You see, he'd asked this, but ended his question with a derogatory slur. All I'll say is that it starts with a P. This guy appeared to be looking for a fight. I'm not a tough guy, but I've gone out of my way to treat people with respect. I pretended like I hadn't heard him and kept walking. He yelled it out again. Now he sounded angry. I started walking faster. The driver sped up to catch me. The passenger called out to me again. "Hey, didn't you hear me?" He ended his question with the same slur. I had begun to shake now. I was terrified they were going to attack me. Somehow I summoned up the courage to tell him that I didn't want any trouble, and he just laughed and said, "Well, I ought to kick you in the teeth for talking back to me." And this was just what I'd feared. I panicked and started running. I was trapped alongside the road with nowhere else to go. A fence blocked me from running into the open field that merged onto the shoulder. I was too scared to look back. I could hear the car driving just behind me. My only hope was the intersection about 50 yards ahead. I could see a car coming from the opposite direction and hope this would deter them from assaulting me. I pushed harder. I was about 30 yards from the stop sign when I heard the car speed up. Just as they passed me, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. And that's when everything went black. When I woke up, I saw a middle-aged woman and a man kneeling over me. My head hurt and my ears were ringing. I tried to sit up, but the woman stopped me. She said an ambulance was on its way. She said something that seemed so odd at the time. Sorry. We saw those boys throw that beer bottle. Johnny got the plate. Try to get away with it. Now, it turned out to be the man leaning over me. I would later discover that the passenger of the car had thrown a quart-sized bottle of beer at me. The bottle nailed me in the back of the head and knocked me out cold. The ambulance took me away, and I stayed overnight at the hospital for observation. My parents brought me home, and I've been here ever since. Since then, I've been terrified to leave the house. I've only left once when I had to identify the passenger. I was jumpy and anxious the entire day. When I saw a car that was the same model as the one my attackers were driving, I had an outright panic attack. They were arrested but got out on bail the same day. I'm afraid they're going to seek revenge. Our house is the only place I feel safe now. I still have nightmares, and the loss of sleep has affected me psychologically. Just reliving all of this has me in tears right now. I'm at my wit's end and will take any help I can get. Please, can you suggest anything to make this waking nightmare? Society was in the process of a massive shift, but the greatest thing to do. I was just some unskilled college dropout trained to be a carpenter's apprentice, and life wasn't any different than I imagined it for most guys of that age. My parents disowned me when I dropped out, and I was fortunate to find a cheap garage apartment near my job. The place smelled like dog, but it beat homelessness. At that time, I was getting around in a 1991 Honda my parents had given me on my 18th birthday, and it was well past its best years and spent a lot of time broken down, as you can imagine. I have a very strange and scary experience on one of those days that I broke down. It was the height of summer, and I was driving home from work. A train stopped traffic for about 10 minutes. Sitting and waiting caused my engine to overheat, and I was forced to turn on the heater even though it was well over 100 degrees. A few minutes later, the train ended and the gate lifted. Traffic began again, but the overheat light stayed on, and I knew that I was screwed. This had never happened before. The heat gauge kept increasing, and the smell of burning made me pull over. I had passed a small service station a few miles back. I hoped someone there could help me out, or at least keep the car going until I got home. As if it mattered, I rolled up the windows. You didn't think I had AC, did you? Locked the doors and began the long walk to the shop. The walk was long and far from a great experience, but I was young and used to the heat. Once or twice, I took a short break under a tree. Even so, I managed to arrive at the station within about 45 minutes. I was struck at how quiet things were. There were no people in the pumps or sounds from the garage. I considered the possibility it was closed, but the open sign was lit up. As I reached the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I couldn't see inside because of all the signs and product stickers covering the glass. When I entered, the door chime went off. No one was behind the register, but I could hear shuffling sounds coming from around the corner. I innocently walked forward and was about to say something when I caught sight of two men struggling for a pistol on the floor. I had an immediate urge to help, but I had no idea who the good guy was in this scenario. The man on the bottom was showing signs of flagging. The desperation and fear in his face still haunts me to this day. I could see he was only a few seconds from losing control. When he let a pitiful whine slip out, I threw all caution to the wind and jumped on top of his assailant. I put the guy in a chokehold. This drew his focus away from the struggle for the gun and allowed the other guy to pry it from his hand. This is when I locked the choke in and waited. The guy grabbed at me but was already slipping into unconsciousness. I held on another few seconds until I felt his body go limp. Only when I was sure he wasn't faking did I let go. I wasn't trying to kill him. I just wanted to be sure that he was out. I gingerly lowered his body to the floor and looked over to the other man, and I was relieved to see the logo of the store on the breast of his shirt. On the opposite side was his name. I leaned up and offered my hand. "Nice to meet you, Paul." "You okay?" He was still catching his breath, but managed to push out a rough, "Yes." I knew the guy would be awake any second and suggested that we find some way to tie him up until the cops arrived. He handed me the gun and asked me to watch the guy while he got some zip ties from the garage. He disappeared through a door and reappeared a few seconds later. The hold-up guy was waking up, but he was still very confused. I lifted him so Paul could attach the ties. The hold-up guy began to fight with me. Paul began punching him. It seemed a bit unfair, but I wasn't about to tell some guy who had been mere seconds from death to be nice to his attacker. One of the punches rung the guy's bell and he stopped fighting. We got the ties on and I watched the guy until Paul could get the cops there. The cops were super cool about the situation, surprisingly. It turned out the robber had knocked over several other stores in town and even shot one poor guy. When Paul heard this, he went pale, and the paramedics had to treat him for shock. If I had to guess, I'd wager the stiff-necked guy is dead or in prison right now. There's no future in that line of work, for certain. Now, when it was all over, I got a tow truck to bring my car to another shop. The driver happened to be on the way to another call and dropped it off at home. A few days later, I stopped off to check on Paul, and he gave me the details on how everything started. The craziest part was that he wasn't even the regular cashier. He was just a guy who worked on cars. The regular employee had a family emergency and he had to fill in until another cashier arrived. He was doing an oil change when he heard the door chime. The gunman approached him just steps from the adjoining door. He noticed the guy had a ski mask on and, in his mind, this meant that he was going to die. His survival instinct kicked in and he grabbed for the weapon. Just as I thought, he admitted that he was on the verge of losing control when I arrived. And he thanked me profusely, then gave me a big hug. I'll not deny that we both cried a little in that moment. Over the years since, he and I have kept in touch through Christmas cards and birth announcements, and I'm happy to say that he's still alive and kicking at 67 years, and I wish him many, many more happy ones to come. The other day, I posted some old photos from 2012. Among them were several shots of my red camera. Since we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the event, I thought that I'd share this very incident that led to its demise. Although I may be able to joke about it now, it changed the way I think about my safety. More or less, it went like this. In 2012, I was 19 and still living with my parents. I had dreams of getting my own place as far away from my hometown as I could get. I would need a lot of money to do this. The majority of my time was spent working, often double shifts, at a large chain restaurant you likely know the name of. I was a line cook, but would also wash dishes to get extra time on the clock. In spite of my rocky relationship with my parents, they did allow me to use an old Toyota that they had purchased for my sister. She was now married and left the car with them when she moved out. It was agreed that I could drive the car as much as I wanted, as long as I paid for the gas and the regular maintenance, both of which I did. Even with well over 100,000 miles, that little Camry remained reliable all the way up until I totaled it. In addition to all the hours I was working, I was also serving as a de facto taxi service for a friend. He wanted to move away himself and worked almost as many hours as I did. In fact, he would go on to be one of my roommates a few years later. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have a car. Most days he was able to get dropped off by his stepmother, but no one was willing to go out after 10 o'clock at night to pick him up. I guess I felt sorry for him. He was a hard worker, and we'd been friends a long time. He and I made an agreement where he'd pay me $20 a month on top of a full tank of gas a week for the privilege. Considering getting him home and myself back added another 10 or more miles to my trip every day, and it was more than a fair deal. You also have to remember that this was at a time where gas was almost as expensive as it is now. Something that I wasn't really mindful of then was how all the hours of work were affecting me at the end of the day. I was running myself into the ground without even realizing it. Driving 15 extra miles a night after working 12 plus hours a day was a recipe for disaster. Whether it was someone looking out for me or I just got lucky, I was fortunate to only receive a few cuts and bruises from my negligence. The date on the photos is September 17th, 2012. I know for sure the wreck had been on a Saturday night. Therefore, my best guess is that the accident took place on the 15th. The date may be a little hazy, but the rest of that evening is still crystal clear. I'd worked a total of 14 hours that day, fully intending to meet some friends for coffee after stopping home for a quick shower. When I left the restaurant, I didn't feel any more tired than usual. From the restaurant, I drove to the next town over and picked up my friend. I managed to drop him off and was about halfway home. He was really hit me. Back then, I was a smoker. I rolled down the window and lit up a cigarette. I hoped the fresh air and nicotine would wake me up a little, but nothing really changed. I was about a quarter of a mile from my exit. I could see the lights of my neighborhood in the distance, and this is the last thing I remember. My next memory was oddly surreal. I found myself hanging upside down with people shouting at me. To say I was confused would be a gross understatement. I was blinded by the beam of a flashlight, and the man asked me if I was okay. I didn't hurt anywhere, so I said yes. Before thinking it through, I undid my belt and dropped on my head. This whole time, voices from outside the car are yelling out to me to be careful and asking if I'd been drinking. I was able to crawl out of the window and get to my feet. I began to feel a bit dizzy, and a man suggested I come over to his truck and sit on his tailgate. Once I did, I felt a lot better. While we sat and waited for the emergency responders, I looked over at my poor camera in disbelief. I remained unsure of how I rolled over. The passenger side was squashed, yet the roof was relatively intact. Soon, the cops and EMS arrived. While the paramedics looked it over, the cops gave me a heavy sobriety test. At the hospital, a sample of blood was also taken to confirm. I was there about 45 minutes when my parents arrived. I guess someone had notified them. My mom was freaking out like you'd expect, but my dad assumed that I'd been drinking and began grilling me about it. The hospital released me in the early hours of that morning, and even after all these years, my dad still hasn't apologized. After a month, I was cleared of any guilt. Luckily, nobody else had been involved. The insurance company wrote the car off as a complete loss, and our rates went up considerably for a while. This gave my dad another reason to be angry, of course, and I got a few days off to find another car and use some of my savings to buy a 10-year-old Focus from some rundown note lot. I jumped right back into things in spite of some residual soreness. My arrangement with my friend came to an end, and I became much more focused on getting enough sleep rather than messing around with my friends after work. I'm happy to say that I don't have any long-term trauma from the wreck. I was nervous about driving for a few weeks, but that faded pretty quickly. Now I make sure to take plenty of breaks on long trips, pass the driving duties on to my wife if needed. Once or twice I've gone as far as renting a motel room and getting that off. It may sound funny, but lack of sleep takes as many or more miles on our highways as drunk driving. Please, people, take it seriously. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. I shouldn't have to tell anyone how stressful and uncertain the last 2 or 3 years have been. Countless people around the world have lost homes, businesses, and loved ones through no fault of their own. As the pandemic waned and the shutdowns lifted, I counted myself lucky not to be one of them. Perhaps it was my hubris, but the universe found a way to change that. Because of an older model car and a drunk driver, I was robbed of the most important person in my life. I wasn't sure if I'd make it, but with a lot of help from friends and others familiar with my loss, I've been able to see a future for myself without him. I'm sharing my experience in order to show others there is hope after such a great and immense loss. Alan and I married late. He had been reluctant to settle down after hearing horror stories of his friends' contentious divorces. I've been married myself once before. This didn't instill much faith in his mind. I was over 30 and eager to start a family. Alan was well aware of this, but put no pressure on him. He came to the decision that he was going to lose me and propose. I was more than happy to accept. To be honest, I was afraid he'd call me on my plan and let me go. Fortunately, we both got what we wanted, and we were eager to move ahead together. We tried for a few years to get pregnant, but it never happened. My doctor suggested fertility treatments. Due to the cost, we chose to forego buying a new car, much needed by the way, to pay for the procedures. We'd only managed to get one round before the pandemic struck. Our dreams seemed to grow less and less likely by the month, but we didn't quite lose hope just yet. As the summer of 2021 arrived, things in our area began to get back to some semblance of normalcy. Our favorite restaurant had just opened to sit-down customers again. Alan and I packed into my 20-year-old VW Golf and headed downtown. Dinner was just as fantastic as I remembered it. I was on cloud 9 afterwards, and this was the moment at which life chose to present me with my latest test. On our way back home, my VW began to have engine trouble. This wasn't anything new. My priorities were never on auto maintenance. In truth, the poor car had made it a lot longer than it should have. The lurching and jerking continued to get worse until the engine got exhausted. We coasted a few feet onto the outer shoulder and stopped. Alan called AAA, and we waited inside the car for a tow truck to arrive. We'd been sitting there around 10 minutes when a highway patrolman showed up. Alan got out to talk to him. From what I could hear, he was doing a routine check to see if we needed any assistance. Our state is one of those who offer such services. Alan informed him of the situation, and they were making small talk when everything went sideways. Out of nowhere, I heard a massive crash. Instantly after, I saw the patrol car hurling toward the back of my Golf. My last memory was of the officer attempting to push Alan away from the direction of his oncoming vehicle. It was too late, unfortunately. Both men were killed on impact. I awoke some seconds later. Initially, I was unaware of my surroundings, but the smell of smoke pulled me back to reality. I could see through the windshield I'd been pushed another 20 yards or so down the shoulder. There was no overpowering pain. I cautiously stepped from the mangled remains of my car. The floodlights from the patrol car were still functioning, and I could see my way around. The patrol car had come to a rest a few yards away in a field that ran alongside the shoulder. The car that had caused the crash sat a few feet behind me. Both Alan and the officer's bodies were scattered nearby. It was clear I could do nothing to help either of them. That's as far as I'm prepared to go on that front. I was taking in the horror of the scene when I heard a slurred shout from the rear car. I looked over and saw a middle-aged man stumbling off the driver's side, and blood was pouring down his face. My instinct to help kicked in, and I ran over to him to help, but as I got closer, the smell of booze overpowered me. I flipped out. I attacked the guy. He had no idea what was going on. A couple of good Samaritans had arrived and had to pull me off of the drunk idiot. I broke down right there and then. A female paramedic quietly walked me over to the ambulance and helped me onto the gurney. While the paramedics did their work, I cried unlike I'd ever cried before. The doctors were amazed at my condition. Other than a lot of the bruising to my chest and knees, I was unharmed. I spent the rest of the night in the ER and was let go later that next afternoon. The true power of losing Alan had not yet hit me completely. That would come after the funeral. And speaking of the funeral, I was happy to see how many people turned out to say goodbye. Many of them I'd never met. Despite some reservations, I also attended the officer's service. His family greeted me warmly, and we all had a good cry together. And after all the chaos surrounding the wreck subsided, I was left alone to think. And this was when the weight of everything truly fell upon me. The man who Only when a close friend convinced me to attend a grief counseling group was I able to regain some sense of sanity. Although it hasn't been that long, the group has helped me a lot. I'll be the first to admit I have a lot of progress to make. However, if you would have suggested 9 months ago that I could carry on without Alan, I would have probably spit in your face. It may be a trite cliche, but it really does appear that time can heal all wounds. The little part they neglect to add is that every severe wound leaves a scar behind. That scar may be an ill reminder of that past trauma to some. I prefer to see it as a memorial, a monument to a man who I will always love. This makes me smile, and a smile is never a bad thing. Roughly between 1997 and 2008, I was an emergency roadside assistant, a fancy name for a repairman/tow truck driver, in the southwest of the US. Before that, I had been a mechanic with a large dealership. My job led me to get to a tow car shop or get their loaner car back on the road. The emergency assistant gig wasn't much of a change except the roadside assistance company had a wider service area. In my time there, I helped a lot of people. The overwhelming majority of cases were completely ordinary and mundane. That said, I did encounter a few situations I'll never forget, and this post will include 2 of those. The first incident took place in the late 90s. I'm sorry I don't remember the exact date. It was the early part of the day, and I had just left another call. I was driving on a remote section of highway and saw a car parked off on the shoulder with the hood up and the hazard lights on. Of course, I saw a potential customer. As I passed, I got a view of the assumed driver. She was a good-looking young woman wearing short shorts and a bikini top, and I got major Daisy Duke vibes. This made me even more motivated to help in any which way I could. I pulled over a few yards from the young lady and proceeded back to help. I asked her what the problem was, and she said she didn't know. The car had just died. I suggested it may have overheated, and she agreed it was possible. I asked a few more questions and became curious as to why she was thinking about the car. My dad, I'm just fine. I don't know anything about that. Her false stupidity and poor grammar rubbed me the wrong way. It seemed a tad suspicious, but carry on. I needed to hear if the motor would start. I asked if she could get in and try to turn it over. She insisted I be the one to do it and use the ignorance card again. You would assume she had started a car before, and my gut told me something was not legit with the scenario, but I had no clue what was wrong yet. Despite this, I agreed and approached the driver's side very carefully. I was scanning around frantically waiting for any possible threat. When I reached out for the door handle, I saw it. A flannel blanket was laid out across the rear floorboards, and I could see the soles of 2 tennis shoes barely sticking out. I stopped and thought quickly. I forgot, I need to scan my scan tool. I'll grab it real quick. I began jogging back to the truck. I could hear the protests of the girl behind me. I started it and slammed into gear. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw 2 things. One funny and one blood-chilling. The girl was yelling and threw her hands up in defeat. She turned back toward the car, and just as I saw a heavy-set hand from the back door. He looked like holding a crowbar or something like that in his right hand. I called into dispatch and let them know what was going on. They promised to call the highway patrol, but I don't know if anything came to them. The incident took me a lot to learn, especially after dark, but it would be a lot easier to pull something like that off. Speaking of working after dark, the second story took place late one night as I was near the end of my shift. It was a far more serious situation and would lead to me quitting soon after. It was late summer 2008. Despite being close to midnight, the air remained stiflingly hot. I was just killing time until I could go home. I drove around a curve and an SUV was stopped in the middle of the road with the driver's door sitting wide open. There was no sign of the driver at first, but as I got closer, I could see a man in a dark suit pacing around behind the SUV. I pulled off onto the shoulder and got out. I called out to the man and he approached me. He seemed to be stumbling. I thought he may have been injured and asked if he felt okay. When he opened his mouth to answer, I was overcome by booze breath. Great. We got a drunk driver, I thought to myself. He didn't appear to have crashed into anything. He said he was okay, but he thought that maybe the dog had something. I'd answered more than one call for a deer-related crash out there and assumed this was a similar case. I suggested he take a seat to one of the boulders alongside the road and I checked out. To be safe, I let him play and dropped about 40 yards back to the road. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the front of the SUV. I could see some blood smeared on the grill, but there were no signs of any trailing away. I double-checked with my light, but came up empty. Normally, if a deer, or any other animal for that matter, isn't killed right away, it just runs off somewhere else to probably die. There were no signs of this. The only thing I could think was the possibility the animal had been trapped under the SUV. I walked back over and crouched down. The beam of my light fully illuminated the distorted and bloody face of a young woman. I jumped up and out of my skin. My hand leapt to my mouth just in time to stifle a shout. I walked off into the dark for a moment to gather myself, and such things were part of my job. I needed to be a professional if I was going to see this job through. A few minutes passed and I walked back over to the SUV. I took a slow breath in and out and crouched down. The second time was no less terrifying, but I, at least, knew what to expect. The poor girl must have been struck and dragged to a distance. It truly was a horrible picture. I thought the drunk man may have taken off if I told him the truth. And instead, I lied and said it was a coyote. I told him not to worry. I'd call fish and wildlife to come and take care of it. He shrugged and sat back down to wait. I went back to my truck and notified the cops. As I sat there, I stared at him. With each second, my disgust grew stronger and stronger. That poor girl's face was burned into my mind, yet he sat there oblivious to the horror he'd unleashed. She was probably just some hitchhiker walking alone in the dark, and this selfish monster ran her down like some rabid dog. The cops showed up in about 15 minutes, and I showed them her body. This idiot still thought that they were fish and wildlife all the way up to the point of them arresting him. I had to remain on scene and give my statement. Once the medical examiner came and took her away, I was allowed to haul the SUV off to the police impound. It was not a pleasant job. I had no idea what became of the driver, but I can't imagine his quality of life has been great since that night. I hoped the incident would fade away just like all the other times before, but for some reason, I just couldn't move past it. I didn't get much sleep. The look of utter shock on the poor girl's face wouldn't go away. My wife could tell that I was suffering and made me tell her about it, and she insisted I quit, and I put up no resistance. I took a few days to mull it over, but I'd already decided. I put in my notice and wrote a desk in my last 2 weeks. I went back to mechanic work and haven't looked back and said, this is the last time I'm going to talk about it. Something to left, best in the past. I believe this stuff would definitely qualify. I'm a 24-year-old woman currently living and working in the west of the United States. Now, a few weeks ago, I had a strange and scary encounter. 2 of my friends happened to have their birthdays on the same week, and I was busy trying to find them the perfect gifts. I was returning home from a 30-mile round trip. About 20 miles from home, my front left tire went flat. I pulled off onto a wide section of the shoulder and got out to look. The tire had a huge hole in it, but fortunately, I do have AAA just for times like this. I searched through my phone for the number. I dialed it, and just then, an old work truck pulled up in front of me and parked. I assumed it was a good Samaritan looking to help. I got out to let him know that I was okay, and he claimed to be with AAA and pointed to the AAA sticker on my window. He was driving by and figured that he could save me a call. I questioned about his truck. He claimed to actually be a subcontractor for the company. The lady from AAA was on the phone back over to his truck, and now that he was out of earshot, I asked the operator if they use contractors. They do, but all of them drive tow trucks in case a tow is needed. This was not what I wanted to hear, and a sick feeling filled my stomach. I quickly explained the situation, and she promised to send an officer along with roadside assistance. I hung up before I realized what I was doing. I was scared, but knowing a cop was on his way gave me some sense of confidence. I put the phone in my pocket and waved the man over. He seemed like he was beginning to get nervous. By my estimation, it would take at least 15 minutes for the cops to arrive. I figured that I need to keep him busy. I began asking a bunch of stupid questions. Very few made any sense or pertained to the subject. He looked annoyed but answered every one. Suddenly, my phone rang, and it was AAA. I answered, and the operator asked if I was okay. I told her that I was and apologized for hanging up on him. Just smelled the breath. He began looking around. I looked at him, apologized, and mouthed the word that it was my husband. I told him that it'd be a minute. I only had 1 or 2 questions, then he could get to change the tire. The operator assured me that the officer was on his way and he shouldn't be much longer. She was right. Less than a minute later, a police car pulled up behind his truck. The man said that he had to go and quickly walked away, but thankfully the officer caught up with him before he could escape. I thanked the operator and hung up, the proper way this time. I got in my car and watched as the cop spoke to the man. Soon, another cop car arrived and joined him. Just a minute or 2 passed and the real AAA assistant showed up. He got to work quickly and had the tire changed in a few minutes. As he was wrapping up his work, the cop put cuffs on the guy and took him away. I was relieved. I thanked the mechanic and went on my way. I arrived home soon after and have been wondering what became of that fake serviceman ever since. And to date, I haven't received any calls from police or AAA, and that's probably a good sign. I'd rather not know if the guy was a serial killer or anything like that, and I've since removed the AAA sticker from my car. It was one of the big things that drew the man to me. Having a beacon for nutcases on my car didn't seem like the right idea. I'd suggest any other single women out there do anything like that with their cars, no matter how little it may seem. From what I've read, they use things like stickers to create a superficial connection with their intended victims and draw them into their web. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember to pet per deep in spirit.